Alright, everybody, welcome back to the old car show, car cast, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to talk generally about slavery and the history of slavery today instead of continuing with the series on government. Maybe tomorrow I'll continue on the series about government, but anyway. I touched on a little bit about slavery last night, yesterday, but yeah, we'll focus on that tonight. Anyway, so just to begin with kind of a general overview, just to begin with, sorry, I'm having a smoke, but anyway, just to begin with a general overview, pretty much the entire, almost the entirety of human history and the entire world partook in slavery. Pretty much almost every society, if not, nearly every society in history, and every country, continent, culture. But for example, ancient Egypt, of course, ancient Rome, I believe ancient Greece as well, India, Mongolia, China, all over Asia, definitely Africa, all over Africa, Europe, of course, especially from the 1400s onwards, but even before that, like I said, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and let's see, no, I don't know. But South America, Central America, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayans, the Middle East, the Arab slave trade, perhaps was the most extensive, long-lasting, and brutal slave trade of all. But we'll get into more details about that later, pretty soon here. But okay. We can start with like the basics on slavery in America, if you want. I mean, that's what most people are familiar with, and we got our slaves from Africa for the most part, but actually there were a lot of Irish slaves as well. I forget exactly how many. I think the Irish slaves, I think, were a lot cheaper than the African slaves, I forget some of the details. I need to learn a little bit more about that, but I watched a couple videos on that, but it's been a little while. So anyway, I think America got about, over the course of America's, until slavery was abolished, I think in total we got about 500,000, about 500,000 slaves from Africa. And let me see, about 500,000. And actually, we obviously got them from Africa. And what happened, we didn't actually go and round up, send people over there with, guns and chains and all that, and go round up Africans to enslave. What actually happened was Europe started partaking in the slave trade in about, I think, the 1400s. It was an already existing slave trade. It started with the Arabs. It was the Arab slave trade, which started around 600 or 700 AD. And then we showed up, and that was the same system. So actually, we showed up like 700 or so years later, we discovered an already established slave trade. So the Arabs were partaking, in that specific one in Africa, 700 years earlier than us. So who rounded up the slaves? Well, it was African warlords and just slave merchants. They would round them up. They would gather them, enslave them, of course, or kidnap them, put them in confinement and hold them, and then sell them to the Arabs until the Europeans showed up in the 1400s. And sorry, this frickin' need to get the defroster going. I could hardly see when this guy was in front of me with his headlights. Okay, so anyway, damn it. Okay, yeah. So that's how a lot of that went down. And then, so basically we bought them from the African slave merchants and warlords that were kidnapping other Africans and selling them. So, and about 500,000 total African ones. I'm not sure about the total of Irish slaves that we brought to America. But so slavery was legal in the South, obviously, and during the peak of slavery in America, only about 5% of Southern whites owned slaves, and actually, out of the freed slaves and the freed black slaves in the South, 30% of them owned slaves. So 6 times the per capita percentage of freed blacks owned slaves. So 30% in the South. So of course, I think for the most part, slavery was illegal in the North. But there were policies in the North to extradite slaves and send them back to their Southern masters and plantations and stuff. I'm having a smoke here, so I might take little pauses. Okay, and I don't know, I think that's kind of the general overview for the most part, really. As I spoke of yesterday, slavery was enforced by law via government, really. So all these, the Fugitive Slave Act, I think, which I think it was that made that the judge would get $5 or something if he freed the slave, and $10 if he sent him back, and ruled to send him back to his master. So obviously he's the incentive, and $5 or $10 was actually worth a lot back then. I think in the mid 1800s you could buy a pistol for $15-20, like a handgun, which is worth about $300 to even $1,000 today. So it was probably the equivalent of, $10 was probably the equivalent of for a couple $100 or more at least. So, and I think that's per slave. Okay, and the law. There were laws, as I mentioned yesterday, that enforced. Actually, a lot of the poor whites, even in the South, most of the poor whites in the South actually were against slavery. It was the rich people that had more influence that were for it. The poor whites were against slavery in the South, the majority of them, because it drove down their wages. Just like in ancient Rome, of the aristocrats and rich folks and oligarchs and stuff, they brought in slaves, which free labor is cheaper than paying someone, so it drove down poor and working class wages in ancient Rome as well. So, okay. Okay, that's the gist of kind of American slavery. So 500,000 African slaves in America. And then, so let's go to the Arab slave trade for a little bit. Established in the 600s, 700s, somewhere in there. And there's still some Middle Eastern countries, I think, that have slave practices and stuff like that, and at least a handful maybe where slavery is legal. I'm pretty sure. I'm not gonna say for. Well, I know for sure there's a couple, but I'm not gonna say how many because I'm not sure. So I'm just going to tell you I don't know because I don't know. So anyway, so yeah, and it went for 700 years longer than ours did. So and actually, what the Arabs would do, because they didn't want the Africans to seduce or breed with their women, because they thought that the Africans were like sexual dynamos or something. I forget what the word. I heard about this. It was a part of their thought and their culture or something that they wanted to make sure. So what they did was, for all of their African slaves that the Arabs brought over, they would, like with no anesthesia, they would cut off their penises and scrotums. So, which the term would be to turn them into eunuchs. And during the course of the Arab slave trade, there was 112 million Africans that died during the Arab slave trade. That's just the ones that died. That's not even the total slaves they had. So 500,000 slaves went to America, and 112 million slaves died in the Arab slave trade. So that's 224 times what our total slave population was. In just how many died in the Arab slave trade. So I forget. I'm not actually sure the actual estimates of the numbers of total slaves in the what the Arab slave trade did, but I do know is about 112 million died. So pretty brutal stuff. So if you were, let's say, you were being incarnated into this world, this life, or, I don't know, whatever, you could, like, have a perspective or something. Or I don't know, I mean, even if you just got word of this stuff, if you were captured and by a African warlord and being sold into slavery, you would have much rather preferred to be a slave in Europe or America than in the Arab slave trade, because you're gonna have your junk sliced off with no anesthesia, and a lot of these they would do it. They would do it really young, like 8 years old, 12 years old, to these young boys. So yeah, a lot of them died. A lot of them didn't even make it through that practice. Let's see. So, yeah, I don't know, it's just kind of a general thing, and, I don't know, let me see if there's much else I have to say, really, but, okay, you know what, I'll just finish up with the, kind of the morality of slavery. Obviously, it's immoral, but, let's talk about the reasons why it's immoral. I mean, just logically, empirically, and stuff. So, let's say you have self-ownership of your body, right? If you don't own yourself and your body, then I don't know what principle you have. Basically, if you don't own yourself and your body, that means you don't own the effects of your actions, which means you can't be punished for murder or whatever. Because if you aren't in control of yourself and your body, then it's not. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just if you don't have self-ownership, then slavery is not immoral. So, and we all know it is. So yeah, you have self-ownership, and from that, you own the effects of your actions and the effects of what you do with your energy in your body. So therefore, you're responsible for any good things you create, like you make a chair or build a cabin or or vice versa, if you do something bad, like you hurt someone, you shoot someone, you steal something, you vandalize property, you own those effects. So, what slavery is obviously you only have so much time in your life, and so much value you can create. Let's say, you're a carpenter and you create things for people and you get paid to build homes and chairs and tables, or whatever, through woodwork, etc. So you only have so much time and so much value you can create in your life, and so much wealth you can accumulate to pass on to your children, to take care of your family and your wife and yourself. So what happens in slavery is obviously all the work you produce and all the value you create and all the crops you pick, all the labor you do and all the crops you pick are stolen from you. So that's essentially why it's immoral. Your life is being robbed from you. Your time is being robbed from you. That's why theft is immoral. Let's say it takes you a week or a couple weeks to earn the money. Sorry. Let me get rid of this. Alright, I just finished my smoke. But anyway, let's say you earn the money to buy a TV, and it takes you, let's say it takes you 10 days worth of wages to buy a TV, and someone steals your TV. Therefore, they've stolen 10 days of your labor, and essentially, they've sort of enslaved you for 10 days, in a sense, because they've robbed you of 10 days of your labor and time. So that's why theft is immoral, and that's why slavery is immoral. Because, like I said, you're robbing people of their life, their time, their labor, the effects of their body, and self-ownership is a universal principle. Otherwise, if you say, you own the effects of the crimes and the bad things you do, but it's cool, you don't own the effects of your productive stuff. So, like the government can take all your shit and it's cool. Well, if that's your principle, which obviously, as a society, we want to pitch in for collective defense and maybe help out the poor and stuff like that, stuff we vote for and decide as a society to pitch in for. But if your principle is that you don't you don't own the effects of your positive labor and what you create, and that can be appropriated and taken at will. And people can, you got a group of 10 people, and the majority, 6 or 7 people, can vote to steal the crap of the other 3 or 4. If that's your principle, then to be consistent, you'll have to say that the converse, that they're not responsible for the effects of their negative actions, such as murder, rape, etc. So if you're going to be consistent, you have to say, property rights are universal, and so are negative effects and actions. But, I don't know, that's about it. I'm just going to wrap it up here. Probably went a little too long. I probably could have saved some of the latter portion of this video for another video, but whatever. Alright, thanks for stopping by, guys. Thanks for tuning in. So, I might do another video, make another one on my drive home tomorrow night. So, take care. Thanks, guys.